The walls were lined with strange objects, animal bones, feathers, and jars filled with unidentifiable substances. In the center of the room was a stone altar, and on it, a tarnished key. The skeleton key. As Caroline reached out to touch it, the air in the room shifted. The shadows around her thickened, swirling into forms, figures cloaked in darkness, their hollow eyes fixed on her. The shadows grew closer, pressing in on her from all sides. Caroline's breath came in short gasps as she held the skeleton key in her hands. The figures were whispering now, their voices low and guttural. She couldn't understand the words, but she knew they were offering her something, a way out, a chance to escape the fate of the others who had come before her. But there was a cost. The figures surrounded her, their voices growing louder, more insistent. Caroline could feel their cold breath on her skin, their presence wrapping around her like a suffocating shroud. The key felt heavy in her hand, pulsing with a dark energy. In that moment, she understood. The key was not just an object of power, it was a binding force, a pact. The Devereaux family had used it to control the spirits, but in doing so, they had become bound to them. And now, the house wanted Caroline to make the same choice. She could use the key, unlock the secrets of the house and the power it held, but in doing so, she would become a part of it. The spirits would never let her leave. Caroline's heart pounded as she weighed her options. She could feel the pull of the key, the promise of power and knowledge beyond her wildest imagination. But she also knew the cost, the same fate that had befallen Margaret, Lawson, and all the others. With a surge of defiance, Caroline threw the key down onto the altar. The shadows recoiled, their whispers turning into angry hisses. The room trembled, and the air grew thick with the weight of the house's fury. She turned and fled, scrambling back through the crawl space and up into the basement. The house seemed to scream around her, the walls shaking as the spirits surged toward her, desperate to claim her. But Caroline wasn't running blindly anymore. She knew the truth now, knew that the house's power was tied to the key, and that by rejecting it, she had severed the bond. The spirits could not follow her. The air in the house felt heavier than ever. It had been weeks since Caroline first set foot in this place, but it felt like years. The oppressive darkness seemed to press in on her, and every creak of the floorboards and whisper of wind through the halls sent shivers down her spine. The discovery of the previous caretakers, tragic fates, the voodoo rituals, and the sinister connection between the skeleton key and the house had all led her to this moment. But one question lingered in the back of her mind. Where did Violet fit into all of this? Violet, the woman who had once seemed so warm and welcoming, had grown more distant and secretive in recent days. Caroline had begun to suspect that Violet knew far more about the house and the key than she had let on. There was something unsettling about the way Violet always seemed to appear at just the right moment, her cryptic words and knowing looks hinting at hidden motives. Caroline could no longer ignore the growing tension between them. She had to confront Violet and uncover the truth, no matter the cost. It was late afternoon when Caroline found Violet in the sitting room, her eyes fixed on the fire crackling in the hearth. The flames cast flickering shadows on the walls, dancing like specters. For a moment, Caroline hesitated, unsure of how to approach the subject. But there was no turning back now. "Violet," she began, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides, "I need to talk to you. About the house. About the key." Violet didn't turn to face her. She continued to stare into the fire, her expression unreadable. "The key," she murmured, almost as if speaking to herself. "It always comes back to the key, doesn't it?" Caroline took a step closer, her heart pounding in her chest. "You've known about it all along, haven't you? You know what it does, what it's connected to." Violet finally turned, her gaze locking onto Caroline's. There was something cold in her eyes, something that made Caroline's skin crawl. "I know far more than you could ever imagine," Violet said, her voice calm and measured. "But it's not what you think, Caroline. You've barely scratched the surface." Caroline's fists clenched at her sides. "I know about the rituals. I know about Margaret Devereaux and the others who were consumed by this house. And I know that the key is at the center of it all." Violet smiled then, a small, twisted smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, you think you understand, don't you? But you don't. You're just like the others, curious, eager to uncover the truth. But the truth is far more dangerous than you realize." Caroline took another step forward, her anger rising. "What are you hiding? Why are you still here? What do you want with the key?" For a long moment, Violet was silent. Then she stood, her movements slow and deliberate. "You want the truth," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Fine, I'll show you the truth." Violet led Caroline down a series of narrow, twisting hallways that Caroline hadn't explored before. The further they went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The walls seemed to close in around them, and the air grew thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. At the end of the corridor, Violet stopped in front of a heavy wooden door. She produced a small, intricately carved key from her pocket and slid it into the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading down into the bowels of the house. "Where are we going?" Caroline asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You'll see," Violet replied, her tone cryptic as ever. They descended the staircase in silence, the only sound the echo of their footsteps on the stone steps. At the bottom, the passage opened up into a vast underground chamber. The walls were lined with strange symbols, similar to those Caroline had seen in the basement, and the air was thick with the sense of something ancient and powerful. In the center of the room stood a stone altar, much like the one Caroline had seen before, but larger and more elaborate. Candles flickered on either side, casting eerie shadows on the walls. And there, lying atop the altar, was the skeleton key. Violet stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the key. "This is where it all began," she said softly. "The rituals, the summoning, the power that Margaret Devereaux sought, and the power that she unleashed." Caroline's heart raced as she stared at the key. "What are you trying to do, Violet? What do you want with the key?" Violet turned to face her, and for the first time, Caroline saw the true depth of the woman's obsession. "The key is the key to everything," Violet said, her voice low and fervent. "It holds the power to control life and death, to transcend the boundaries of this world. Margaret failed because she didn't understand the full scope of its power. But I do." Caroline's blood ran cold. "You're trying to complete her ritual. You want to use the key too. To unlock the ultimate truth," Violet interrupted, her eyes gleaming with a strange, manic intensity. "To become one with the forces that control this house. To harness the power that has been dormant for so long." Caroline took a step back, her mind racing. "You can't," she said, her voice trembling. "You don't know what you're dealing with. The house, it's alive. It's malevolent. If you complete the ritual, you'll unleash something far worse than you can imagine." Violet's smile was cold and cruel. "You're wrong, Caroline. I know exactly what I'm doing. And there's nothing you can do to stop me." As Violet moved toward the altar, Caroline's fear turned to desperation. She couldn't let Violet complete the ritual, but she wasn't sure how to stop her. The air in the chamber grew thick with a sense of impending doom, and Caroline could feel the presence of something dark and ancient stirring in the shadows. Suddenly, the room began to tremble. The symbols on the walls glowed with an eerie light, and the shadows seemed to come alive, writhing and shifting as if in response to the key's presence. The air was filled with a low, guttural hum, like the distant rumble of thunder. Caroline's heart raced as she watched Violet place her hands on the key, her eyes closing in concentration. The ground beneath their feet began to shake, and the temperature in the room dropped dramatically. Caroline could see her breath in the air, each exhale a puff of white mist. "You're too late," Violet said, her voice echoing in the chamber. "It's already begun." The shadows on the walls twisted and coiled, forming into vague, humanoid shapes. Caroline's breath caught in her throat as she realized that the spirits were awakening. The same malevolent forces that had haunted her dreams were now manifesting before her eyes. She had to act fast. Caroline lunged toward the altar, grabbing the key from Violet's hands. But as soon as her fingers touched the cold metal, a shock of energy surged through her body, sending her stumbling backward. The spirits hissed and writhed, their forms growing more solid, more menacing. Violet's eyes snapped open, and she glared at Caroline with pure fury. "You can't stop it," she snarled. "The house has chosen me. The ritual will be completed, and I will wield the power of the key." Caroline struggled to her feet, her heart pounding in her chest. The spirits were closing in, their hollow eyes fixed on her. She could feel their hatred, their hunger. They wanted her, wanted to consume her, just as they had consumed the others. But Caroline wasn't ready to give up. She still had one card to play. Caroline gripped the key tightly, her mind racing as she tried to remember what she had learned from the voodoo book. The key was more than just a tool for unlocking doors. It was a conduit, a way to control the spirits that were bound to the house. If she could just figure out how to use it, she might be able to turn the tide. The spirits hissed and lunged toward her, their forms flickering like shadows caught in a storm. Caroline raised the key, focusing all her energy on the symbols she had seen in the book. She whispered the incantation, her voice shaky but determined. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the air around her began to shift. The spirits paused, their movements halting as if they were being held back by some invisible force. The hum in the air grew louder, and the key began to glow with a faint, eerie light. Violet's eyes widened in shock. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice trembling with rage. Caroline didn't answer. She could feel the power of the key surging through her, the energy coursing through her veins like fire. The spirits were still, their forms wavering as if caught between two worlds. With a final surge of determination, Caroline thrust the key toward the spirits. A blinding flash of light filled the chamber, and the spirits let out an ear-piercing scream as the light engulfed them, their forms dissolving into the air like smoke caught in a fierce wind. The ground trembled beneath Caroline's feet, and for a moment, it felt as if the very walls of the ancient chamber might collapse.